This video is sponsored by Ground News. Western car manufacturers are in big trouble. Demand for EVs is flagging. European plants are closing down or decreasing worker salaries. Notably, Volkswagen might just start closing plants in Germany for the first time in history. Stellantis, a giant conglomerate holding 14 of some of the biggest global car brands, has fired its CEO after a 40% drop in stock prices. Meanwhile, China is kicking down the door on the whole world with their cheaper and better EVs, which is about to cause a trade war with the EU and the US. What does all this mean for EV adoption? Where does this put the supposed green revolution in transportation? Is the EV revolution already dead before even getting off the ground? If so, what else can we do? First, we should tackle the elephant in the room, namely that today, EVs in general are kind of bad. I'm sorry. When buying the EV version of a car, from the everyday user's perspective, they're essentially paying more money for an inferior model. Let's look at an example. Suppose you want to buy a smaller Volkswagen car to get around. You can either get the regular combustion engine version or this new EV version. The latter is heavier, has a shorter range, takes longer to refuel, is more sensitive to weather, and its energy storage degrades over time. It also seems to lose way more of its value the second you drive it out of the dealership. Now, with all this being said, the electric model does have some advantages over the combustion one. Namely that it's cheaper to operate, it's emission-free, and it's much quieter. It also has fewer moving parts, so maintenance is supposedly easier. And all that is quite nice. If you are willing to pay an extra 8,500 euros for the pleasure. Seriously? 37,000 euros for a city car? No wonder Western EVs are in trouble. It's as if their makers think the average person is an upper-middle-class suburban yahoo, boredly kicking around wads of cash in their living room, not knowing what to do with their money. Now, don't get me wrong, the upper-middle-class market segment is absolutely real, but by now it's pretty much saturated. In Western countries, most people who wanted and could afford an EV already got one. So for manufacturers, the only way forward is to make EVs appeal to a wider market, to introduce more affordable models with better characteristics, which Western manufacturers notably haven't really done. I mean, there are some supposedly cheaper and more advanced models coming soon at the time of making this video, but that's it. Škoda recently came out with their new EV, the Elroq, which people hyped as an affordable option. It still costs about $33,500. Škoda Auto is owned by the Volkswagen Group, by the way. And yeah, the Elroq is nice, but you can also get the new Fabia with a combustion engine for less than half the price, $15,000. Or you can just get a used Octavia for like 8K. Right. And the problems with EVs don't stop at the price. Looking at this McKinsey survey from February 2024, about a fifth of customers are disappointed in their EVs and are likely or very likely to switch back to a combustion car with their next purchase. That's not great, honestly. EV owners are having additional issues as well, which we'll get to after a word from returning sponsor Ground News. Ground News is a news aggregator website that collects articles from all around the world to give you an overview of how different sources report on the same story, so that you'll get to be aware of a news source's political bias, reliability, ownership, and more. With the amount of issues the American media environment has, being a sensationalist, over-corporatized, profit-driven hellscape, I would argue Ground News is basically a necessity, especially in the new Trump era, even if you live outside America, as their media is by now global media. So yeah, speaking of, did you know that the Trump team is already discussing possible airstrikes on Iran to stop their nuclear program? So much for not being the world police, huh? According to Ground News, this story was covered by 94 articles so far, with a bias distribution towards the right. The bias comparison, a really handy feature, tells us what the headlines of each political category focus on. For example, the focus of left-wing sources is on the potential instability and uncertainty these measures might bring about. Further along, we can see the factuality rates of each source and their ownership structure. Ground News is a powerful information tool helping you navigate the news information landscape, enabling you to stay on top of the news cycle. And it's got my recommendation. Go to ground.news/Adam or scan this QR code to receive 50% off their Vantage plan with unlimited access to every feature. Or you can try their Pro plan for $1 a month for great value. Thank you for checking out Ground News, and thanks to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. The three main issues for EV owners, according to this survey, aside from battery-related concerns, are cost, obviously, underdeveloped charging infrastructure, and the inconvenience of having to plan out long-distance trips due to having to factor in charging. Are there chargers on the way? Can I afford the half-an-hour delay if I need to charge my car? Will there be multiple cars standing in line in front of me at the charger, each taking half an hour? That sort of thing. And yeah, those are real issues that do deter potential customers. Having to deal with more inconveniences in exchange for a higher price tag is not the best motivation motivation for getting an EV. This is a major problem for Western car manufacturers, particularly European ones. You see, according to European emission reduction plans, from 2035 they essentially won't be able to produce cars with an internal combustion engine due to ever stricter emission standards. In light of Dieselgate and the myriad of ways car makers cheat with emission measurements, they deserve every bit of that regulation and more. But why is the evil EU forcing technologies on regular people which most don't want or need? Some people might ask. After all, looking at sales numbers, it's obvious that most people prefer combustion engines. And this assessment, for the most part, is wrong. It's not that people don't want electric cars, it's that people don't want expensive and underwhelming Western electric cars. And this is where China steps in. As Western car makers were dragging their feet, their Chinese counterparts went in hard on EV technology with substantial state assistance. But still, the end result is EVs that are often more advanced than their Western counterparts and are cheaper. Much cheaper. Compare the Volkswagen car we talked about earlier, the base model ID3, with the BYD Dolphin Honor Edition. Both cars have a similar range and performance. Okay, the Volkswagen accelerates faster, and the BYD has a max speed of only 150 km/h. So all you people who do drag racing with your small city cars, the BYD is out of the question now, I'm afraid. Charge times are similar, features are similar, the BYD's range is not that far off for a city car, but of course the ID3 is the better car out of these two. The BYD Dolphin Honor Edition is also $25,000 cheaper. Right. With China set to steamroll the market with their affordable EVs, we might ask the question, what were Western car makers doing until now? How come that after more than a decade of supposedly feverish EV development, Western EVs are overpriced pieces of shit set to be blown out by their Chinese competition? That's because instead of focusing on EV development for the past decade, Western car makers were busy getting rich in China. That's right, up until now they had a more than 50% market share in China, flooding the country with their cars. In the meantime though, Chinese companies, and the state really, were taking notes. They copied Western manufacturing processes, which Western car makers were obliged to share in exchange for being there, which the Chinese then took and perfected to the point where their EVs have now surpassed their Western counterparts in their price-performance ratio. So the crisis of Western car manufacturers is basically their own fault. First they made a deal with the devil essentially, not to say Chinese are the devil. They traded their manufacturing know-how for market access, and now they are losing the Chinese market and are threatened back home as well. The EU and US have both responded to competition with tariffs on Chinese EVs. The US with 100% and the EU with up to 45%. And this had a couple of notable effects. First, they made Chinese affordable EVs more expensive for everyone. So much for the EV revolution, I guess. Second, the tariff move is basically guaranteed to spark a backlash from China, from stopping investments in certain countries to potential counter-tariffs, which I'm sure will do wonders for the economy. Third, many Western car models, including Teslas, are made in China in large numbers to be shipped to the Western market. Those cars are now also affected by the tariffs.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Trying to solve the Chinese EV problem with tariffs is like trying to kill a hostage taker with a shotgun from a distance. Still, the Chinese EV revolution seems unstoppable for better or worse. Chinese brands like BYD, instead of exporting cars to Europe, will just build plants in Europe, as they are already doing so. This means, tariffs here or there, Western car makers are basically screwed, unless they can cut their EV prices in half or something, which I highly doubt will happen. And now to the moral of this story, which I think is twofold. First, state investments work. Western countries let private corporations loose on the EV problem, while the Chinese government involved itself directly in development. The Chinese have results, we don't. It seems the invisible hand of the free market was busy doing something else. We should, at long last, forget about this 1990s attitude of let private companies innovate our way out of the problem. Corporations only want to innovate insofar as they make money on it. And that innovation is not always positive. See this advertisement system patented by Sony, where the only way to skip an ad on your TV is to stand up and yell the brand's name out loud. That's some great fucking innovation you got there. Second only to the Amazon wage gauge, which is also a real patent by the way. The second moral of the story is that EVs are an inherently shit way of solving emission problems. Why should we need multi-ton hunks of metal to get around to begin with, costing tens of thousands of dollars? At that point, you're putting emission reductions behind a massive paywall that most people are unable or unwilling to jump. Well, that's because it's impossible to get around without a car, one could say. Cars are a basic necessity to do absolutely anything. And that's exactly the systemic problem underlying the struggling EV revolution. How do we solve that? Watch this. Hey, check out my brand new EV I got, with which I do literally all my daily tasks, including large shoppings. I got it brand new for $5.5 thousand, a mere fraction of an already insanely cheap BYD Dolphin Honor. What miraculous EV could that be? A cargo bike. But hang on, how do I go on trips outside the city? Public transit. Okay, but how do you go on longer journeys? Train or airplane? Fine, but what if something comes up that absolutely cannot be handled by cargo bike, public transit, long-distance train, or airplane? What if you have to carry 80 kilograms of luggage while also taking both your disabled grandmothers to the hospital? Get an Uber. But what if you also have to transport a piano? Get a moving company on the phone. Look, we can sit here and think of scenarios where private car ownership would be theoretically a must, but as far as the vast majority of people are concerned, if you provide them with quality cycling and transit infrastructure and plan settlements in a way that it doesn't force them into a car, most people will not want a car, even though there is nothing standing between them and actually buying one. They are free to do so. They just don't want to, because why would they? This is why a city like Vienna has 375 cars per 1,000 inhabitants, while in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, this number is 826. And I realize that not every city is built to enable freedom from cars. Most cities aren't like that, in fact. However, changes are happening, with Paris leading the way nowadays. Even in America, mind you. Even Houston is working on developing its bike paths. Even goddamn Houston. So I don't want to hear any excuses. Changing cities for the better is a question of getting the right people into office or just politely nagging your current democratic leaders to enact positive changes. So why not give it a try? Oftentimes, planning departments of cities are pretty progressive and they would like to enact a bunch of beneficial measures. Except the upper management, the mayor and company, have only ever seen the city from inside their cars and have no conception of everyday cycling or public transit. If you reach out to the planning department requesting some improvements, well, suddenly they can go to the mayor and tell them that the people, you, want a certain measure enacted. If the people want something, the city leadership suddenly becomes much more amicable. As an alternative, you can get like 10 of your buddies together and promise them a round of drinks or something if they go with you to the local town hall meeting where all of you will individually argue for, say, a bike path on Main Street. Once the mayor sees the clear and obvious public demand for the bike path, they might just get it done. And yes, oftentimes it's that easy. Most town hall meetings are attended by the same bored, lonely boomers there to erode the mayor's sanity with their latest series of paranoid hallucinations, talking about how the sidewalk on Main Street should not be repaired as that will enable shoplifters to run away faster, or inquiring whether the sports hall's new roof will be chemtrail-proof. In that environment, having you and your buddies there will feel like salvation to the mayor and they'll be motivated to listen to what you have to say, which is that you all want a bike path on Main Street, because by giving people the option to use transit methods other than cars, less people will use them and suddenly this whole EV affordability crisis becomes a lot less relevant. So anyway, the entire discussion about the crisis of EV manufacturers and the stalled greening of transport via EVs is misguided. In its current form, the plan to popularize EVs basically amounts to greenwashing a broken, wasteful system that is our current planning practices and transport infrastructure. Because it turns out EVs aren't here to save the planet, they're here to save the auto industry. In reality, we need not EVs, or at least not necessarily, but properly planned cities, quality public transit, and usable, coherent, safe bike infrastructure. Freedom from cars instead of freedom from the internal combustion engine.